Alright guys, we are torquing on the exhaust manifold. I already did the preliminary steps. There's a 4-step sequence in torquing this thing on. I'm on the last step. Final torque is 25 Newton meters. But because we are having to use a special tool to get to some of these harder to reach bolts, especially the ones obscured back there, I have to use a dog bone. But when you're using one of these, it changes your action. It changes the center point or your center line. So again, math is involved. They give you, like I said, they give you a handy little chart here. It's very basic. You have to measure from basically the center line on your handle to the center line of the head. In our case, ours is 8.75 inches. You then multiply that by your torque rating, which again, this is the final torque rating, so we're at 218.75. You then divide that number by your 8.75, the length of your usable length of your torque, or the effective length of your torque wrench. You add the 2 inches. I'm sorry, you have to measure center to center on your adapter, just about 2 inches. So 8.75 plus 2 inches gives us 10.75. You then divide those two numbers and that gives you 20.3 Newton meters. So for any bolt you don't use the adapter on, the ones that are more accessible, you just use your regular torque reading of 25 Newton meters. But for the harder to reach ones, you use 20.3. Sure it's lined up. All right. We're going to go ahead and replace our low pressure solenoid. Ours, I actually left mine in the top portion of the oil pan when I put it in the solvent tank. May still be okay, but I'm not going to chance it. So another 30 bucks off of good old Rock Auto. Looks the same to me. Alright guys, we are starting to plumb the turbo. Really not much to show you here. You have your oil inlet and your oil return right here, and that goes right there on the block. Coolant line up here runs up to here. Again, this is just the plumbing of the turbo, coolant, and oil lines. Kind of going to be kind of hard to show you what's going on. Got an assortment of copper and aluminum crush washers. That is always the way to go. These are the nice shiny new ones versus the old ones. These are M14 by 18. Cleaned up the bolts. Basically, you put a washer on. It's called a banjo bolt. Goes through the line. Put another washer on. And then it gets installed into the block. Pretty simple. One of many lines that needs to go back on this motor. halfway there. She's almost there. Just a hair more. I mean, that's pretty much it right there, guys. That's good enough. I got Loctite on the bolt too, so we're good. It's actually kind of tricky to see. There's these little tack marks on the damper, and on the cover you can see there's a little arrow, so that's just one more point of reference to make sure the damper's on correctly, because we knew the motor was top dead center number one. We knew all of our timing components were set up correctly. The trickiest part to this is this gear. This is the old one. This, as you can see, goes against, it goes onto the stub of the crankshaft like that. You can see it has an eccentric, it's got a flat spot, so it's got to go on a certain way, and then it just floats there. So this just pops on the stub of the crank, then you put your chains on, and if you saw earlier in my videos, I just had a bolt ran through this to hold it in place, because you take the bolt out and you have your chain tension. If you don't have all your chains on the right way, I mean, it'll just pop, it'll cant off or pop off in a different way. So once you have your cover installed and you take that bolt out, it's pretty tricky. Now, Audi does make specialty tools, but obviously, as you saw, it was not absolutely necessary. You just have to make sure everything more or less stays in place. And once you have your chains tensioned, which is one more reason why I pre-tensioned the timing chain. This is where our timing chain tensioner is. You're supposed to pull the relief out through this hole once the cover's on, but I didn't do that on purpose. I wanted to pre-tension everything. And plus I wanted to rotate the motor over and make sure everything was good. But you know, there's little ways, there's all sorts of different ways to do this. But again, I pre-tensioned all the chains, so this had pressure pulling up and downwards, so it more or less held it in place. And then, like I said, we installed the front cover. This is the side that faces the crank, and then this is the side we were just looking at. And as you can see, you have your little arrow. That's got to go, hold on, I go through. You can see your little arrow. That's obviously got to go top dead center. That's got to go in the right position. That's going to be in the right position because we're already meshed into the crank side. And again, this is just floating on the stub of the crank. So once you take that bolt out, if you kind of pop this with a screwdriver, it would pop out and get all screwed up, and you'd have to pull the cover off. Now, Audi makes a special tool you have to put in there. You know, we're not going to mess with that. So once this is where it's supposed to be, as you saw in the video, I had to put on the other side of the damper, which you can't see now, there are grooves to mesh up to those grooves. So you have to make sure you're not only installing it correctly into the seal because it is a standard umbrella style seal, you've got to make sure your damper is meshed to these grooves. We already knew that the gear sprocket was meshed to our crank and the timing chain was correct. So again, that was the last little nervous point where you kind of have to hurry up without fumbling, because again, you have to make sure that this crank or the damper is meshed to the grooves. Now you can, with this bolt out, you can kind of look in at an angle and make sure everything's where it's supposed to be, which it was. So damper's on, front seal's back on, front cover's on, oil pan's on. Making progress. Alright guys, I got more parts. Tranny service kit, coolant, crankcase module, filter, not the filter, I'm sorry, crankcase module, diaphragm, engine air filter, spark plugs, all the various O-rings and gaskets, fuel filter, cabin air filter. We are going to rebuild the clutch with new plates and new friction material. These things are actually not that hard to take apart and put back together, so we're going to go ahead and throw them in there. Got a new tensioner, new oil filters. This is going to be for the break-in, and then this will be afterwards. This is going to catch all that extra tiny little bit of junk in the block that we may or may not have got out. This is just the old water pumps just set to the side, some of the old tubes, a new O-ring for that connection, a new water pump belt, and a new water pump eccentric screw, reverse thread, because I kind of learned, I didn't break the old one, thank goodness, but definitely needed that new one. It came out of New Jersey of all places. It was like $1. New belt, new thermostat, new O-ring for that, new rear main seal. We already did the front seal on the crank. This little thing is neat. It's $4. The old one is still hanging out of the water pump. I'll pry it out later. I guess these are a known failure point because they make an anodized aluminum replacement. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace that. It was $4, whatever. So parts.